I never thought I'd be here, sipping coffee in a quiet cafe, wearing clean clothes and writing down a story that no one might ever believe. Back then, I wasn't a man that you'd invite into your home. My days revolved around scraping together enough change for my next fix, and my nights were spent in a crumbling building on the edge of town. That place had a way of holding on to the broken, the forgotten. It held on to me until the night it let me go in a way that I'll never forget. I guess I should start with how I ended up here in the first place. The building had been abandoned for decades, a shell of brick and stone looming like a gravestone for the neighbourhood's better days. The front door was chained shut, but the back window was smashed just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and despair. The graffiti scrawled on the wall was like language only the damned could read. It was my home for almost a year. The others who came and went were like me, ghosts of their former selves. We didn't ask their names or histories. We just shared needles, scraps of food, and sometimes a silence. But one by one they left, or disappeared. I didn't ask where. I didn't particularly care. Not until I was the only one left. The night it happened, I was chasing a high. I'd scored a little rap earlier that day, something stronger than usual. I cooked it up and pushed the needle into my arm, watching the world blur into a strange warm cocoon that I'd always thought would save me. But this time, it wasn't warmth that greeted me. It started with whispers. I thought the wind was cutting through the cracks in the walls, but these weren't random sounds. They had a rhythm, like a chant just out of earshot. I sat up, blinking through the haze, trying to pinpoint the source. The room, if you could call it that, was empty, except for a torn mattress and junk that I kept in the corner. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of unintelligible voices that seemed to surround me. And then came the cold. It wasn't the kind of chill you feel on a winter's night. It was deeper, crawling into my bones and pulling me in and out of my high. My breath puffed out white clouds, and the shadows in the corner of the room began to move. At first, I thought it was the substance playing tricks on me. Hallucinations were nothing new, but this was different. The shadows didn't just move, they stretched, pulling away from the walls, growing taller and darker. They had form, shape. They had eyes, yellow, piercing eyes that grew into the blackness like embers in a dying fire. I stood but stumbled back, tripping over the mattress and landing hard on the floor. My head swam, but fear and anxiety sharpened my senses. The shadows circled me, their voices melding into one deep groaning sound that seemed to vibrate through my whole body. "You don't belong here," it said. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could describe. A rumble, a hiss, a scream all at once. My throat was dry and I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The shadow closest to me leaned down. Its face, or what passed for a face, was mere inches from mine. It looked solid. It was smoke and darkness, swirling and shifting, but its eyes held me in place like chains. "You've been marked," it said, "and we're hungry." I don't remember how long I sat there, paralysed, as the shadow loomed closer. My heart was pounding, my body frozen, but my mind screamed at me to run. When I finally found the strength to move, I bolted for the window. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The shadows followed. They didn't walk or crawl, they glided, their forms sliding all over the walls and floors like living darkness. I squeezed through the window, feeling their cold breath on the back of my neck. I hit the ground outside hard, scraping my hands and knees on the pavement, but I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in an alley nearly 2 blocks away. The next morning, a man found me in that alley, a stranger with kind eyes and a calm voice. He said his name was Eddie, and he worked at the local shelter. I don't know what he saw in me, but he didn't turn me away like most people did. He gave me water, a blanket, and a choice. to come with him or stay on the streets and continue the suffering. It's been 5 years since that night, 5 years clean, 5 years of therapy and rebuilding a life I thought that was gone forever. I've tried to make sense of what happened in that building, but it feels conflicting. It all felt too real to just be the substances that I was taking. I've gone back to the abandoned building during the daytime to see if it was still standing. It's not. The city finally tore it down last year and replaced it with a sterile parking lot. But the shadows still haunt me. Not in the way you'd think. No nightmares, no visions. Just a lingering cold in my chest when I think about them. A reminder of how close I came to losing everything. Or maybe I did lose something that night. Something the shadows took and never gave back. The darkness within myself that was shattered during the experience, like a confrontation with my shadow. This is the first time I've shared this story, and if you're reading this, maybe you felt them too. The shadows that feed on your despair, that wait for the lost and broken. If you have, know this. They thrive on your anxiety, but they can't take what you won't give. I'm living proof of that. Not far off 20 years ago, just after Christmas when I was about 15 years of age, me and my two friends at the time, Liam and Owen, were bored out of our minds that night. And when you're bored at that age, bad ideas start to sound like good ones. It was Liam who suggested we check out the abandoned factory on the edge of town. Everyone knew the stories about the place, how it was built in the 1800s, how it had been used during World War II to make military supplies, and how people went there swore that they saw or heard things that they couldn't explain. Faint screams, shadowy figures, stuff moving on its own. I'd always thought these stories were over-exaggerated. But when Liam brought it up, I didn't say no. None of us did. We had nothing better to do anyway, and just wanted a thrill. At about midnight, we grabbed our flashlights and walked into the cold, rainy night. The place was fenced off by the local council due to it being hazardous, but we pushed through the gap that had been made in the metal fence. The factory was exactly what you'd have expected for a place like that. The building looked like it had been dead for decades, with broken windows and chunks of the roof that had caved in, rust and moss covering everything, and the rain had only made it worse. The air felt heavy, like the place itself didn't want us there, but we went in anyway. The first room we entered was massive, probably some kind of assembly floor. Our flashlights barely made a dent in the darkness. You could hear the rain leaking through the ceiling, water dripping onto the concrete floor. There were old machines rusting away in the corners and piles of debris everywhere. It smelt like damp wood and decay. I remember thinking it was colder inside than it was out, even though it didn't make sense. "It's creepy as hell in here," Owen muttered, keeping close to me. Liam just grinned. "Don't tell me you're scared, we just got here." "I'm not scared," Owen snapped, but I could tell he was. Truthfully, so was I. I just wasn't about to admit it. We wandered around for a while, poking through old office and storage rooms. It was mostly just junk, broken desks, rotting papers and graffiti on the walls, but something about the place felt like it was stepping back in time. It was dead creepy, and other than the sound of the rain, the place was silent. Liam suggested splitting up, pointing his flashlight towards the hallway. Owen laughed nervously. "Yeah, no thanks, I'm good here." "Don't be a baby," Liam said, turning to me. "What about you, man, you in?" I didn't want to seem scared, so I agreed, putting on a brave face. "I'll check out this side." And just like that, I was on my own. The hallway I took was dark and narrow, lined with rusted doors. My flashlight flickered as I moved, the beam trembling in my hands. I told myself it's just an old building, just a bunch of silly ghost stories, but the deeper I went, the worse it felt. The air was freezing, and I couldn't shake off the feeling I was being watched. Suddenly, a faint scraping sound came from the room ahead. I stopped, my heart pounding. It sounded like metal dragging slowly across the floor. I shone my flashlight towards the noise, swallowing hard. "Hello?" I called out with my voice shaking, as if I was expecting someone to answer. It was empty, except for a few old chairs and tables pushed against the wall. I scanned the room with my flashlight, every nerve in my body on edge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the chairs moved. Not just a little jerk or wobble. It slid across the floor, slowly, like someone was pulling it. The scraping sound echoed in the silence. My throat went dry and my legs felt like they were rooted into the ground. Then came the growl. It didn't sound like an animal. It was low, demonic, and it sounded like it was coming from everywhere all at once. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a rational explanation, thinking it was probably Liam trying to mess with me. But it didn't sound like a noise that a human would make. "Oh my god," I whispered, backing away. "Oh my god." The growling started again, and I bolted. I don't even remember running, I just knew I had to get out of there. I found Liam and Owen in another room down the hall. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because they both stared at me with wide eyes. "What happened?" Liam asked, but I couldn't get the words out. I pulled his arm and yelled, "We have to go, now!" They didn't argue. The three of us ran as fast as we could, our flashlights bouncing wildly in the darkness. The air felt heavier with every step, like the building itself was trying to hold us back. As we neared the exit, we heard it. The same growl I had heard in that room. It was faint, but unmistakable. We burst through the front door and into the freezing rain, not stopping until we were halfway across the field. It was then we looked back. There in one of the second floor windows, a shadow, moving past the broken glass. It was tall, human-like, and its edges were blurry like smoke. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. Neither of them answered, but I knew they'd saw it too. We finally turned and ran. I don't know what we encountered that night, and I don't think I ever will. The factory was recently torn down. I've told myself that it was all in my head, that maybe it was just a product of our overactive imaginations feeding into the atmosphere of the night, but deep down I knew the truth. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't natural. Alright guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.